really looking forward to this conversation. Take it easy on me, Anthony, a little bit. I'm not a data scientist, but first of all, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you here. So, give us a brief sort of, day in the life of Anthony Scriffignano. And uh, I believe you're 6 or 7 languages, and are you quite the tango dancer as well? Is that so? Tell us about your day job and anything else you'd like to share with us.
Yeah. Day in the life. There's no such thing. I'm reminded of that movie. You can't handle the truth. Um,
Yeah.
there's there's um, there's a lot going on, and in an organization. So I'm with Dun& Bradstreet. It's arguably the largest corpus of business information of its type in the world. We collect information essentially from all over the world. It comes in millions of updates a day in different languages, in different writing systems, in different data supply chains. All of those countries have different laws about what you can share, what you can't share. You put this over here, don't put that over there. And then people want to know what it means. They want to understand. Imagine if you had we're going to move from healthcare to commercial, decision making, credit and sales and marketing. But the majority of the businesses in the world are very small businesses, and they have to be able to reach each other, and they have to find each other, and they have to be able to extend credit terms and get credit and put bread on the table. So most companies in the world are very small. They're not these big conglomerate companies that we think of when we think of corporations. The vast majority of companies are very small, and they're very hard to find. They don't leave much of a footprint, and they expect that you'll know about them when they want to do business with you. So that's kind of the problem that we're faced with. And then, where there's more money, there's more fraud. With all of the disruption that's going on in the world right now, we've got a lot of challenges with what's still there, who's still alive, are they doing what they used to be doing? We've got companies that used to make scuba gear, that make respirators, and companies that used to make blankets, making face masks. So it's, there's a lot of change going on. So what's a day in the life? Insert all of that here, and you get some version of what we're trying to deal with right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And as the what does for those people who certainly know what data science is, but maybe they don't know it in depth. What does the chief data science officer do, and not just generally speaking, but also at DNB?
It very much depends on the company that you're at. So the title is not, it's not like the chief financial officer where we could say, all right, we pretty much have an understanding of what someone with that title does. In different organizations, it's a role that you'll find in different levels of the organization. So I'm in the office of the president, but in other parts of in other companies, you might find the role in as a technology function. You might find several people with that title in different parts of the business. So I get away from the title and I get to like, what's the job, right? Data science as a whole is a number of things. There's a science in data science. So it's understanding not only tools and technology, but also understanding belief systems and understanding methodology. The scientific method is about being able to ask an important question and then research it with a degree of empirical rigor. It includes things like understanding bias, understanding how wrong you need to be before you would make a different decision. It includes something called storytelling, which is taking the data, that all of the analysis that you've done and the data that you've ingested, and then being able to make it relevant to someone who needs to make a decision with it, making it actionable. It includes informing future research. So we use, in my group, we're really hardcore. We use propositional calculus. We write down what we believe, what the axioms are, what the postulates are. We're very clear on what you have to believe in order to use this method. So if you don't like the answer, you're free to not like the answer. Tell me what you don't like about the methodology, and then we'll talk, right?
Yeah.
Uh, all of that is in the science of data science. In some organizations, it's not so much that. It's a bunch of people using a bunch of tools and open source code and plugging things together, and people running around saying, what does this mean? And there's, like anything, you'll find more or less discipline in it wherever you are. And I'm not saying we're like the pinnacle of discipline. There's always things you can do better, but I think that in general, what Jim was saying just now was, in the bigger organizations, you're having an opportunity to affect more of your world, and that's definitely true in my world as well. You can also make a much bigger mistake, so you have to be very careful. people, we talk a lot about, fail fast, fail fast, but make new mistakes, right?
Right.
So you got to use the science. You can't just run around and be a tool practitioner.
Right. Um, we talked a lot about, artificial intelligence, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who are very interested in artificial intelligence, and even some on the call that are quite sophisticated and have advanced knowledge around that. Um, you know, it was very interesting to me to ask someone like you, where, AI is not something either big or, how do I understand it? You understand it. So I'm curious, what interests you moving forward about AI, particularly as it relates to, applying it to the business? What excites you about it? Where are the innovations to come in AI? Everybody knows artificial intelligence is important. We know it's permeating
Yeah.
all enterprises, but what excites you about it?
Well, there's the AI in the movies and there's the real AI, right?
Right,
So,
right.
the first thing you want to think about in AI is like, what school of thought are you in? What discipline are you in? So, as an example, a large number of AI methodologies are what are called supervised methods. They take
Yeah,
data about the past and they kind of munge it together with a bunch of math, and then they make projections into the future, assuming the future looks something like the past. Great idea. Maybe not such a great idea with COVID happening, right? So, unsupervised methods are methods that allow you to take unstructured data or data that maybe doesn't have a clear ontology or data that is maybe less, I'm trying not to say structured, but less structured in its instantiation, and use it for things like clustering, finding out where the data seems to be coalescing, where how it seems to be telling its own story. You combine those two methods, you get these hybrid methods, right? And then there are belief systems. So, as an example, there's a branch of AI called cognitive AI, where the AI tries to converge on advice that human experts are more likely to take, right? I don't know what you experts are doing, but you seem to like this kind of advice better than that kind of advice. That's another type of AI. So, lots of different methodologies that are out there. And what excites me, number one, is that a lot of this is not new. It's been around for a long time. But now all of a sudden we have the compute power and we have these very large corpora of data to work with. And so it's not about finding needles in haystacks. It's about finding needles in stacks of needles. There's so much data out there that,
right.
and that's a good thing and a bad thing, because going back to belief systems, one of the dangers in belief systems is something called the a priori conclusion, where you think something's true and then you go find data that proves that you're right because you think you're true.
Right.
It gets a lot easier to do that when you have a lot of data. You go into any very large corpus of data, you'll probably find something that supports what you think is true. That doesn't make it true, right?
Right.
One of the things that we do in my group is something called veracity adjudication, which is sort of
Mm.
judging the truthiness of a conclusion or of a stipulation in the data. All true data is not simultaneously true. It may have been true when you ingested it. It may not be true
Right.
anymore. And then I don't mean to jade you or shock you, but people lie. There's lies in data. And so, I like to say there's a reason why when we go to court, we have to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, because those are three different things, right? So
Right.
make sure that you're including all of those frames of truthiness when you're trying to judge how truthful or what the veracity is of the data.
Yeah.
There, we used to talk a lot when big data was something you could talk about. You had these V's of big data: volume, velocity, variety, value. Those are all and those are all aspects of big data, right? Those are all what makes big data big. You've got to actually treat every single one of those things in your methodology. You have to have an answer for, how am I going to deal with value? Some data is more important than other data. How will I know that? Define important. What's the problem you're trying to solve? I talked a little bit about how wrong you need to be before you would make a different decision, right? That's a concept called decision elasticity. So decision elasticity is a very good frame for judging the value of data, right? So you tie all
Hmm.
this together, and all of a sudden you're starting to do science, right? You're starting to do
Right.
something that is empirically rigorous. If other people using the same methodology with the same discipline did the same thing, they'd likely reach the same conclusion. That's a good day, right?
Absolutely. And so what I find interesting about that, and sort of rolling on the fly a little bit here, are you at DMB, and or do you recommend other, chief data science officers and other people in the sort of the data organization? Are you in at the beginning? It's, let's say DMB wants to create a new product. So it's not just analyzing the data and coming up with great insights and applying great sophisticated data science to existing product or existing customer sentiment or whatever. Are you seeing it in that you're even earlier on in the process, a little bit related to Josh's question to Jim, where the CIOs and the CTOs are really at the table at a strategic level, looking at business model innovation, product innovation? Where are you in the process as the data scientist?
Yeah, for sure I am. So my role is purposely positioned exactly as you described it, so that it's part of my job to meddle a bit, to get involved in, product ideation and even other aspects of business. If we're going to do certain types of business versus others, et cetera, I have a seat at the table, and that's intentional, because my job is to bring that empirical rigor to the decision-making process, to help make sure that we're making decisions based on, as much as we can, what's possible, not only what the data says, what the data might say in the context of a problem. I'll give you a very simple example with the funding that was recently put forth for small business to help pay protection. I said before, where there's more money, there's more fraud, right? So
right.
No big surprise, right? But it's not that simple, because people are going to starve if you don't help them, right? So there's a human side of this. Get the money out on the street and help the people who are, just unbelievably disrupted, and help them fast.
Yeah.
The flip side of that, of don't throw money away, right?
Right.
You don't get to stop doing one and start doing the other. We don't have the luxury of saying, oh, we're going to go serve, as an example, some of our clients are government agencies that are trying to make decisions like that, or support decisions like that, right?
Right.
We have to help them, and they don't all want the same thing. Some of them are focused on protecting the whatever, and some of them are involved in getting the money out there, and some of them are involved in small business growth, and some of them are involved in privacy, and well, those are kind of opposite things to want to optimize, right?
Right. Yeah. And interesting, you mentioned supply chain, and a question did come in. I'll read the question. You probably won't want
I
to
can't
ask.
see the chat right now, so if anybody's chatting at me, I'm
Yeah, there's if you want to pull up the chat window, you can, but I'll read the question. So sorry, will DMB be helping the Biden administration in its attempt to consolidate organized supply chains, especially those R&R grant-oriented small companies dealing with SBIR, STTR? I'm not going to ask you to answer the question about your dealings with the Biden administration unless you want to. But my question really is sort of the supply chain.
Yeah.
And you sort of touched a nerve there. So my question is, as you're meddling, it's not just obviously about new product or figuring out what your customers want. I mean, are you back there in the enterprise operations as well?
Yeah.
Are you applying data science to supply chain and other sort of enterprise operational types of issues?
For sure. So in my world, supply chain means, where does the data come from, and how do we connect it all together? So the data supply chain. We also have a supply chain, if you will, of our vendors who sell us stuff, but we kind of make analytic insight and data, right? We're not making bicycles, but it's the same problem, that our supply chain got disrupted with the disruption that happened. So part of our supply chain are the courts, right? Suits, liens, judgments, all of those things. Well, the courts were closing. So now, how do you know who is going out of business when you're not getting bankruptcy filings, because your supply chain is disrupted? So we have those kinds of issues. But then we had the supply chain issues of all of our customers. So who are our customers? Pretty much all the big companies in the world. And if you think about what those companies were dealing with, they were dealing with their customers and their vendors, and their vendors' customers and their customers' vendors. And it was, Jim talked about the virus, the disruption from COVID, sort of moving from China to different parts of the world as sort of a wave. And I think maybe epidemiologically that's accurate, but from a business perspective, that wasn't accurate at all. So you had a lot of action and reaction going on. And don't forget that disruption happened amidst other disruption. You had social unrest, you had an election cycle in the US, you had Brexit, you had trade deals being renegotiated. So all of those things were already causing perturbations in supply chains. And so what our customers want, what they want to understand: total risk, total opportunity. They want to understand not only supply chain disruption, but supply chain weakness. Where are my vulnerabilities? Not too long ago, the trend was consolidate, get as few as supply chain counterparties as you can, and manage everything you can about that relationship to optimize it. Well, now with everything being disrupted, some people are rethinking that and saying, maybe having a little bit of redundancy there helps you deal with unintended disruption. that comes from the outside in that's unforeseeable, because all the supervised learning in the world isn't going to tell you that you look like a bat to a virus, right? So
Right.
you got to be able to deal with all of this. So
Very
very long
interesting.
answer, but we had our own supply chain disruption. Our customers do, and for sure, this administration has agencies which we very much hope will look to us, and intend that we will work with them to help them deal with the sorts of challenges that we're talking about.
And you did mention the pandemic, and I'll go back in time a little bit here. And what did you learn, either, not only as a manager or leader within your group, but also just as a data scientist? What did you learn from maybe your other fellow data scientists in the organization or in the industry? What happened as it relates to data science and the ecosystem and the learnings over the last year? And maybe what surprised you or what didn't, but more I'm interested in, what happened with data science over the last year.
So I was working with one of my colleagues, not in my company, said that for our business, the busiest day of the year is Mother's Day. And then all of a sudden, every day became Mother's Day, right?
Right.
One of the things that I learned was that we the industry, the digitization enablers of the world, whatever you want to call us, all that, lots of different titles, right? A lot more resilient than we thought we were. Right? Think about the platform we're using right now. I don't want to name it because I don't want to do commercials, right? But we're using a platform, and it's being used for a conference. It's being used for delivering, education. It's being used for government meetings. I don't think anybody ever anticipated that a platform like this would, suddenly become one of the go-to kind of platforms. We'll multiply that phenomenon by thousands, right? The products and services and capabilities that were available in cloud computing, in cybersecurity, in remote conferencing, in just building things like microphones and cameras and lighting and all of the things that you need to make stuff happen. All of a sudden, the demand went off the chart in a way that no one could ever possibly have predicted.
Right.
And things didn't fall apart. It's like Y2K, it happened, and what is it over? Like,
Right.
things happened, and I'm not saying nothing happened in Y2K, but it certainly wasn't the cataclysmic quantum singularity that was being predicted. And a lot of that is because we might be more resilient than we think we are. So that's one. And the other is, I think that, if you say, what did I learn in terms of what did I discover, that would
Yeah.
be a category. What did I learn, like actually get better at, or
Yeah.
is communicating, right? So at heart, I'm a storyteller. I come from a family of storytellers, right? I'm the quiet one in my family. Right? If you go on YouTube, and you can find me talking at big events and things, we talked about this, right?
Yeah.
The way you influence a room full of people, when you can hear them laugh, when you can see whether they're checking their emails or paying attention,
Right.
right? I'm looking at you, right? I'm not looking
Yeah.
at anybody.
Right.
I'm looking at a camera, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you influence a virtual audience that you don't know how big it is? You don't know if they're paying attention. You don't know if they're multitasking. And at the same time, say something that's relevant and meaningful. And so one of the things I learned to do was to rely more on language and less on paralanguage, right? Rely less on the I hate to say the theatrics, but the big slides and all. You can't do all of that in this kind
Right.
of. So we have to meld our brains better, right?
Very interesting. Now that's a great answer. Yes, and I I have 6 sessions today that I'm moderating. I don't know what anybody's doing out there while I'm
Right.
doing this. Right? It's like, and I definitely want to get back amongst the people as well. So I feel that. Before we leave, I did want to ask you a little bit about bias. You said something very interesting to me. You said you can't replace bias because it's replaced by different bias. So
Well, people say they're going to eliminate bias, right? You
yeah,
can't eliminate bias because that is introducing some other bias, right?
right, right.
The bias of what it should have been or what shouldn't be in there.
What should be our approach to bias, understanding that it's there? Is it first identifying if it's actually creating a problem, and then go from there? Or what is your approach to bias in data or bias in algorithms or whatever it might be?
So the term has both general and specific meaning. So there's a mathematical meaning behind what you're saying, and then there's just sort of a common language meaning, right? So we say we want to be unbiased in everything we do. We'd like to be unbiased. And I think what we mean by that is we don't want to be overly influenced by a preference for one characteristic over another. However, unfortunately, in order to make most decisions, you have to consider characteristics.
Right.
So there's a dichotomy built into that that we kind of ignore when we say that I'm going to drive bias out of my decision making. What I try to do as a data scientist is I try to understand what the levers are of the function that I'm trying to produce. So let's say that I'm trying to, a great example is we say as a first principle in different parts of the world that we value privacy in different ways. There's some countries in the world that say that you have a right to be forgotten, and that's first and foremost. There's other
Right.
countries in the world that say there shouldn't be this watcher state that's looking over our shoulder and taking note. There's other countries that say national security trumps everything. There's other countries that say do whatever you want. It's commerce. People will drive their own, right? Those are all opposite things. They're completely different. Well, orthogonal. Two nine things can't be opposite, but they're all. Sorry, I used to be in physics. I know I'm a nerd, right? They're not the same, and they move in different directions, right? But let's just say you understand what you think you mean when you say you value privacy. Then you say you want customization. You want your products to work intuitively. You want them to learn from their experience with you in the past so that they can serve you better. Well, those are opposite things to want also.
Right.
So when you think about bias, if I say that what bias means to me, I'm making this up now, is that you should not ever make a decision in hiring based on race or gender or that whole list, right? Great. If I can say that I didn't even have access to that information, now
Right.
I'm an algorithm now, not a person, right? I
Right.
didn't have access to that information, so I know that it didn't bias my decision in that way because it wasn't available at the time the decision was made. The fact that somebody could later develop some kind of correlation that says you appear to have had a preference for this gender over that gender or whatever, that may have played itself out in the correlation of the output. It certainly wasn't included in the decision making. That's only part of the problem because sometimes there's a
Right.
requirement to go beyond that and
Yes.
make sure that even the outcome isn't biased, and then you have a whole different conversation. So
Right.
you got to start with defining what bias means, defining how you would measure it, defining what you're trying to avoid, and understanding the opportunity cost that when you do more of something, you do less of something else. You've got to make a more holistic assessment when you start considering bias, especially in AI, because AI learns, it learns in quotes. There's no real learning, but it
Right.
tends to agglomerate decisions and make similar decisions in the future. So, you have to be very careful that you don't sort of multiply your ability to do these sorts of things. I said that you can accelerate the speed with which you hit the wall, right?
Right.
Be really careful about that.
Right. Well, look, I could talk to you for another half an hour. I always learn so much when we chat. Thanks so much for joining us, Anthony. It's really great to chat with you, and I hope we can do this in person sometime soon on stage.
It was a great pleasure. I enjoyed it enormously. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much.